a movement requires a person of the moment to provide momentum. And Herb really fit that bill.
After this discovery of the counter-stress response, of the relaxation response, he ended up really shifting his career into understanding that more. Now that came at a cost.
What he knew about mind-body medicine deep within him was critically important, but he couldn't really communicate that to his colleagues that just wouldn't hear of it.
In the late 1960s, Herb was a faculty member teaching physiology at Harvard Medical School.
He was a rising star. I mean, he was a young cardiologist, budding cardiologist here. You know, he shares this beautiful story of being in the Walter Cannon labs.
That was the very lab in which Walter B. Cannon had discovered the fight-or-flight response 40 years, 50 years before that.
Herb was a really inquisitive guy, and the offer was presented to him to study meditation.
A group of meditators, again in the tradition of transcendental meditation, really approached him. They saw this young cardiologist, he's studying hypertension. We know that we can use our approach and reduce blood pressure.
It really struck a chord with him that there is the potential for discovery here.
He also said that I was not doing a good job treating patients pharmacologically. Tools I had were limited. I was either over or under medicating. I just didn't feel like I was doing them justice.
He was a very objective scientist, and he had very deep questions about how meditation was functioning in the brain and body.
And he's like, I didn't even do it in my regular business hours. I did it on the nights and the weekends, and I'd let them to the back doors where nobody knew they were coming in.
We'd bring them through side doors of the quadrangle so people wouldn't see what we were doing.
He knew it would find disfavor amongst the faculty leadership.
When he actually did the initial pilot studies, he was like, wow, there's something here. There's some physiologic effect happening, and there's something that I can do for clinical care. And that began, I think, as I understand that was the genesis.
The science convinced him that this was something of potentially great importance for medicine.
Could it be the opposite of the fight or flight or emergency response?
In an effort to not make it just unique to one tradition, he ended up coining this term, the relaxation response.
He was willing to put his reputation on the line.
He continued to move on to other contemplative practices, and he was the first scientist to really work hand in hand with the Dalai Lama. He was able to study these esoteric practices of meditation that up until that point, no scientist had ever had access to.
And I was already being told in those years that I'm wasting my career.
He didn't have the confidence of the department leadership at the hospital.
I could really feel the frustration that Dr. Benson experienced all those years from his colleagues.
When you've been this eminent professor, you're well respected, you're really producing good science, and at the same time you're asked to leave.
He had such a strong sense of purpose and vision that this had to get off the ground.
At least this is some scientist. This is carrying some, I think, genuine, meaningful experiment or research work on this line. Now, as far as I know, my old friend is Dr. Benson.
His first book, The Relaxation Response, became almost an instant bestseller. And so people would come to our conferences almost as if they just wanted to touch his white coat, because, he was sort of a celebrity.
Dr. Benson definitely made this concept of the science very accessible to the lay public.
He was a rock star in those early days because as much as he understood the critical importance of this mind-body medicine for overall healing, there were other people that also knew that would come to the conferences and really recognize the greatness of Dr. Benson.
Those conferences were very well received. They seemed to really meet an important need in medicine.
When I was a patient in the program, the Institute was housed at Beth Israel. medical center, and we weren't a money-making department. And so they invited us to leave.
The work that Herb at the Mind Body Medical Institute was doing was extraordinary and perhaps not heralded in the way that they should be.
Certainly it helped that along the way, John Henry, the owner of the Boston Red Sox, had offered a very generous endowment gift.
Just prior to my arrival, it was John Henry, and was really, I think, inspired by the work that he was doing, and really felt this is important to support.
The Mind Body Medical Institute came over to Mass General in 2006 and became the Benson-Henry Institute for Mind Body Medicine at MGH, serving as a thematic center for the whole hospital.
He ran his practice, saw his patients, not only with his mind, his extraordinary mind, but also his extraordinary heart.
I would see patients here, and in the waiting room they would be sitting, and he would offer them a cup of water, and that was just his thing. And I think that took patients off guard. It's like, wait, he's offering, Dr. Benson just gave me a glass of water.
He always had a smile. He was always balanced.
People came here stressed, and when people come upset or stressed, what's the first thing you do? I say, would you like a glass of water? And that was brilliant. And when someone offers you a glass of water, you can see the stress response already is cut in half.
What it was like taking an elevator ride with him, where you'd start perhaps on the 10th floor, and by the 4th floor, he was friends with everyone on the elevator.
His legacy was so focused on research, and that's up to the day, sort of, I think his last breath in some ways was always about the research.
All the components that Herb had created in the early years are still the components that we're emphasizing today.
We've actually changed, I think the Institute has changed, this work has now spread much further than he could have ever expected. I think if he were alive, he would be very proud to see how many people we've trained, where we've trained it, the types of disciplines that they represent, where they are in the world.
He just makes it seem so simple that it was something I felt like I could share and teach.
The meaning of my life is so much related to the work that I do clinically. And if it weren't for Dr. Benson, I don't think this field would exist.
It's always going to be a debt of gratitude. I get to stand on the shoulders of what he did.
His contributions were huge in that when he started out, mind-body medicine was, considered to be the far side of the lunatic fringe, and now it's in the mainstream of medicine everywhere, and certainly at the Harvard Medical School.
I think he himself felt gratified that he had come full circle and that he had made the right decision by kind of embarking on this journey by himself.
It's sometimes even hard to call him to mind or to talk about him because we do miss him so much. But I think one of the things that warms my heart is that he lived long enough to see his dream be fulfilled and to know that everything he had sacrificed, it was worth it.